President Trump is on the world stage, and to get started, he had some housekeeping complaints about the United Nations.
I don't mind making this speech without a teleprompter, because the teleprompter is not working. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen, but she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter.
Yes, the escalator inside the United Nations broke, and then as the president started to speak, the teleprompter had problems. But after jabbing the UN about the escalator and the teleprompter, Trump got down to business.
Just 8 months into my administration, we are the hottest country anywhere in the world, and there is no other country even close. I ended 7 wars, and in all cases, they were raging with countless thousands of people being killed. It's too bad that I had to do these things instead of the United Nations doing them. And sadly, in all cases, the United Nations did not even try to help in any of them.
And then after jabbing the United Nations, he had a message for the individual members of the United Nations.
When your prisons are filled with so-called asylum seekers who repaid kindness, and that's what they did, they repaid kindness with crime, it's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
President Trump is in New York for the 80th United Nations General Assembly, but he is not just speaking on the world stage. He is also meeting with some world leaders. Today, President Trump is meeting with, or has met with, leaders from Ukraine, Argentina, the European Union, Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan. The president is also meeting with the United Nations Secretary General. White House correspondent Mike Carter is in New York with the latest. Mike?
Hey, Greta, good to be with you. President Trump, I should say the White House, said that President Trump's speech today at the UN General Assembly would highlight what American strength looks like and also would put globalists on notice. But as you mentioned, President Trump noticeably annoyed when he arrived at the UN this morning. When he and First Lady Melania were set to ride out the building's escalator, it stopped working. Minutes later, during the start of his speech, the president's teleprompter malfunctioned, forcing Trump to read out his speech, at least the first part of it. Nevertheless, Trump began his speech by touting the 7 global conflicts his administration has brought to an end without, he says, any help from the UN.
Likewise, in a period of just 7 months, I have ended 7 unendable wars. They said they were unendable. No president or prime minister, and for that matter, no other country has ever done anything close to that. It's too bad that I had to do these things instead of the United Nations doing them. And sadly, in all cases, the United Nations did not even try to help in any of them. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle, and then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter.
Well, in a subsequent meeting with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres today, Trump saying that while he doesn't agree with everything the UN does, he does see great potential in it. Also today, President Trump meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the two men discussing security guarantees backed by Kyiv and European allies, and the president making it clear he supports NATO countries shooting down Russian military aircraft that enter into NATO airspace. Also, he says the failure of the Russian economy is hurting Russia's war effort.
Do you think that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter their airspace?
Yes, I do. Well, the biggest progress is that the Russian economy is terrible right now. It's, as you know, it's crashing. And that, frankly, Ukraine is doing a very good job of stopping this very large army.
In a Truth Social post that Volodymyr Zelensky says is a big shift, Trump saying this afternoon, after getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. And during Trump's speech today, with NATO countries seated right in front of him, Greta, President Trump continuing to go after European countries that continue to accept and purchase Russian oil, saying doing so only funds Russia's war effort.
China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase Russian oil. But inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy and Russian energy products. Think of it. They're funding the war against themselves. In the event that Russia is not ready to make a deal to end the war, then the United States is fully prepared to impose a very strong round of powerful tariffs, which would stop the bloodshed, I believe, very quickly. But for those tariffs to be effective, European nations, all of you are gathered here right now, would have to join us in adopting the exact same measures.
And at a bilateral meeting this afternoon with Argentina's President Javier Milei, President Trump endorsing Milei in his re-election bid. And Milei, like Trump, has also cracked down on illegal immigration in Argentina. It's an action that Trump says European allies need to follow.
Not only is the UN not solving the problems it should, too often, it's actually creating new problems for us to solve. The best example is the #1 political issue of our time, the crisis of uncontrolled migration. It's uncontrolled. Your countries are being ruined. The United Nations is funding an assault on Western countries and their borders.
All right, Greta, there have been a number of European nations that have come out in support of Palestinian statehood in recent days, including France and the United Kingdom. President Trump making it clear today that is not something the U.S. will subscribe to. He says doing so would only reward Hamas, and saying, the president today, that the hostages need to be released, all hostages, and the bodies of those that we've already lost. Greta?
Mike Carter, thank you. Former U.S. Ambassador to NATO and former Special Envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, joins me. Good afternoon, sir. And boy, what a difference. And before, it was President Trump in Alaska being quite pleasant with Vladimir Putin. And now he's writing this Truth Social where he's talking about moving the original borders back to where the war started, which could be Crimea, since a lot of people in Ukraine thinks the war started in 2014, not 2022. He even goes farther to say that maybe the border should go even farther back than when the war started. He's really lashing out at Putin in this.
Yeah, he's really trolling Putin, commenting on how bad the economy is, commenting on how bad his military is. You know, he said any good army would have taken Ukraine in a week. They're still struggling after 3 years, talking about Ukraine taking all of the territory back. So he's clearly trolling Putin here. I think it's another tactic of his to see whether he can get Putin to engage seriously about ending the war, something that Putin has never done.
President Zelensky must be quite happy. They've had a few dust-ups, most notably that one in the Oval Office a few months ago. But President Zelensky has had a hard time getting through to President Trump about what's going on the ground there. President Trump thought he could talk to Putin, talk some sense into him, but I think President Trump has now given up, because now he talks about even NATO providing support.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think President Zelensky, from that meeting in February until now, has really reset the relationship with the U.S. and President Trump. He's in alignment with the U.S. in calling for an immediate end to the war, calling for a ceasefire, willing to negotiate, willing to meet with Putin, all of the things that Putin is unwilling to do. And so this, I think, has gotten the U.S. and Ukraine back in the right track here and supporting NATO's efforts to actually help Ukraine militarily with the war. And meanwhile, I think he is increasingly frustrated with Putin. And you saw that in the way he lashed out at Putin today. But the one thing I would stress here is that Trump is still not suggesting that he will be taking any further action. He's not promising additional sanctions. He's not promising additional support for Ukraine. He's calling Putin out and then basically saying, okay, Europe, over to you.
Well, he's not just calling Putin out, he's calling out Western Europe because they complain about the war, yet they fund the war by buying oil and gas from Russia. I mean, Russia wouldn't have the money unless someone bought their oil and gas. But he's also calling out the UN, basically saying, the way I interpret it, he's saying, listen, UN, you're not doing your job and you expect the United States to do it. You know, that basically Dad has to do it. Dad has to come up to the UN and do it. So, I mean, there were a whole lot of people he's calling out.
Yes, no, that's true. That's true. Notably, though, the biggest consumers of Russian oil and gas are China and India. And he chose to mention Europe instead. Europe has a plan to end their purchases of Russian gas by 2027. Hopefully that does get accelerated. And that's what seems to be what Trump is calling for. And I hope they do accelerate that. But we also have to focus on where the majority of Russian oil and gas is going and being paid for.
Well, that's where the secondary sanctions come in, and that's where India's in trouble because India doesn't want those secondary sanctions.
Well, those are tariffs. He hasn't done secondary sanctions.
I meant tariffs. I meant tariffs.
Yeah. Well, he's done the tariffs, an additional 25% for India. But India is going to make its own choices. They're going to try to decide, do we change our policy of buying this Russian oil and gas in order to avoid the tariffs, or do we just let the tariffs be charged? It's American consumers who are paying for the goods from India and pay the tariffs. Maybe the Indians don't care. So I just don't think that approach is as effective as actually sanctioning the businesses, the ports, the vessels, the refineries that are doing the business with Russia.
Ambassador Kurt Volker, as always, thank you, sir.
My pleasure, Greta. Good to see you.
Coming up, he aimed a rifle at President Trump, decided to be his own lawyer, and now he got some bad news from the jury. That when the record continues. Guilty on all 5 counts. That's the verdict reached in the Ryan Ruth trial. Ruth, who represented himself, which is never a good idea, has now been convicted in the attempted assassination of then presidential candidate Donald Trump. This happened in September of last year at the president's West Palm Beach Country Club. As jurors started leaving, Ruth appeared to try stabbing himself with a pen. Marshals swarmed him, and then they grabbed him. Meanwhile, this is frightening. The Secret Service stopped a potential threat to world leaders at the United Nations. The Secret Service says it discovered a network of electronic devices around the New York area. Secret Service says these devices could be used to carry out attacks, such as disabling the cell phone towers and blocking emergency communications, such as dispatching police. Here's what the Secret Service said earlier today.
Investigators discovered tens of thousands of co-located and networked cellular devices capable of carrying out nefarious telecommunications attacks. These devices allowed anonymous encrypted communications between potential threat actors and criminal enterprises, enabling criminal organizations to operate undetected.
Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council, former Ambassador at Large for Counterterrorism, and former Undersecretary of State Nathan Sales joins me. Nice to see you, sir.
Great to see you, Greta.
First of all, I mean, good for the Secret Service on this. I mean, they've taken some well-deserved hits for their failure last July when the president, then a candidate, was shot in the ear. But they get big points for this one. But I don't understand, what did they do? What did they find, and how did they find it? Do you know?
It's a good question, Greta. Certainly great police work, great investigative work by the Secret Service to uncover a plot of this magnitude. And let's be clear, there's a handful of countries around the world that have the wherewithal to pull off something like this, an attack on our infrastructure that could really cripple 911 communications, phone networks, cell networks, texting, and so on. It's a short list, right? It's Russia, it's China, it's Iran, and maybe a couple of others. So watch this space. I think the federal government will be telling us more as this investigation proceeds. They've certainly got a sense of what countries these communications devices were communicating with. So let's watch and see what they tell us. But make no mistake, this was a potentially very significant threat to the United States. It's a good thing that Secret Service was on its game.
My guess is they got tipped off because it is so extraordinary that they would just sort of stumble on something like that. It looks like it might be at several locations, and they don't. And some look like office buildings almost. And somebody obviously rented the space. I mean, somebody, it looks rather sophisticated, but that may be perhaps because I don't know a lot about the topic. But it does seem like that they must have had a tip on this to have gone in, and they must have been doing this investigation for quite some time.
Yeah, that's certainly one way this could come to light. Federal law enforcement agencies are really good at penetrating threats, cells that are operated by adversary nations or terrorist organizations. So it's possible they had somebody on the inside here. It's possible they had a tip from the landlords of the buildings. It's possible that there were other means that brought this plot to light. But you're right, Greta, this is a very sophisticated plot. The amount of hardware and the capabilities that it had to disable American communications networks, this is a significant threat, and it's a good thing that we were able to detect it before it was too late.
It surprised me if it was a nation state. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Russians or members of the Chinese Communist Party or something. But it would be so outrageous to come into New York City and do this for a nation.
Yeah, and this is part of the reason why the Trump administration kept the Iranian delegation on a short leash. When you come to the United States, you don't get to go to Disney World and be a tourist. So the Iranian delegation discovered that their, shopping spree at Costco had been canceled, and they're not going to be able to purchase American luxury goods at a time when they're suppressing their own people at home. So, our adversaries love to come to the United States to enjoy the freedoms and prosperity that our system enables, and then go back home and work every day to undermine what the American people enjoy here in the United States.
Ambassador Nathan Sales, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Greta.
And coming up, late-night TV host Jimmy Kimmel is back. Or is he back? That when the record continues. Tonight, late-night TV host Jimmy Kimmel is back on the air. Well, sort of back on the air. He's not completely on the air. Last week, Kimmel was suspended following his comments about Charlie Kirk's assassination. Yesterday, Disney announced after conversations with Kimmel that it was allowing him to return. But two broadcast groups with at least 66 ABC-affiliated stations are not letting Kimmel off the hook. Last night, one station group took to X to say, quote, "Beginning Tuesday night, Sinclair will be preempting Jimmy Kimmel live across our ABC affiliate stations and replacing it with news programming. Discussions with ABC are ongoing as we evaluate the show's potential return," end quote. The other station group cited Kimmel's ill-timed and insensitive comments in keeping Kimmel off air. With two large station groups not airing Jimmy Kimmel, that means that more than half of all ABC stations will not be showing Kimmel's return tonight. Meanwhile, Putin is playing a dangerous game of chicken with NATO. A series of suspected Russian drone incursions are causing disruptions across Europe, which means across some NATO nations. And today, authorities in Norway closed the airspace for several hours around Norway's largest airport in Oslo. This came one day after Denmark was forced to stop flights at its main airports in Copenhagen due to the drones. Russia denies the airspace violations. And further west in London, passengers at Heathrow Airport were met with long delays and cancellations. This following a cyber attack. A cyber attack targeted check-in and boarding systems at Heathrow and elsewhere. Now moving about 6,000 miles from London to Hong Kong, 700 flights in and around Hong Kong have been canceled, but not because of Russian drones. Instead, due to Super Typhoon Ragasa, forecasters are describing it as this year's most powerful cyclone on Earth. It's already killed people, 2 killed in Taiwan and 3 in the Philippines due to widespread flooding. Businesses in Hong Kong have shut down, and authorities are urging people to stay indoors. Coming up, Kamala Harris is back in the news. That when the record continues. Today, former Vice President, 2024 presidential candidate Kamala Harris is back in the news, and she's doing TV interviews. Why is she in TV demand? Well, her new book was released today. It's titled 107 Days. Harris gives readers some surprises. For instance, she writes that Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was not her first choice for a running mate. Her first choice was former Secretary of Transportation Peter Buttigieg. Why didn't she select her first choice? While Harris claims America was not ready for that pairing, she said that Buttigieg, who is gay, would have been ideal if he were a straight white man. So rather than a gay man, she chose her first runner-up, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Harris also writes that Arizona Senator Mark Kelly was in the running for her VP choice. It's not clear where he landed in her lineup, but she writes that she did not choose Kelly as her VP running mate because she feared what the, quote, brutalities of a modern political campaign would do to someone she regarded as an American ideal of selfless service, end quote. Kelly is, of course, a former astronaut. And Harris has harsh words, though, for her former boss, former President Joe Biden. She said his decision to run for re-election was, quote, reckless. But what does she think, though, about his policies as president? To get that answer, you're going to have to go back to October 8th, 2024, 1 month before the November election. Harris was asked then by the women panelists on The View if she would have changed anything the Biden administration had done. Here was her answer.
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
So today, almost a year later, Harris made another appearance on The View to discuss her new book. Here is the former vice president.
There are many factors, I think, that played into the outcome of that election. But I think probably one of the biggest in my mind is we just didn't have enough time. That night, I grieved in a way that I have not since my mother died.
Wow.
And the pain was, it was not at all about losing a race. I knew what it was going to mean for the country. I love Joe Biden. And I also am very clear and have made a point of making it clear. Joe Biden was a highly capable president.
Yeah.
It's a good relationship.
Yeah.
And it's a relationship that is based on mutual respect, having been in the trenches together, and admiration. And it's sincere, sincerely.
If you recall, you were here 28 days before the election, and I asked you if there was anything you would have done differently than President Biden during the past 4 years. And you said, quote, there is not a thing that comes to mind, end quote. Do you think that moment tipped the election?
No. No.
CPAC Chairman Matt Schlapp joins me. Nice to see you, Matt. Matt, I can understand where she writes, I've been listening to part of the book, that she didn't want to tell Biden to get out because she had such a self-interest so that she could be the candidate on top of the ticket. But this idea that she grieved not for herself, but for the country, you know, that's just a little too much for me. I mean, maybe I've been around politicians too much. And when you look at, the country wasn't doing that spectacularly well with the open borders when she and her running mate left office.
Yeah, this is one of the most bizarre political stories that's occurred in a long time. A lot of times the left said that Trump was unstable, and it's a bizarre thing to write a book like this for her, slashing and burning kind of everyone. And, I take her comments on mourning. I bet it's really hard to lose a presidential race. I bet you probably never get over it. But you're right. It's ridiculous. It was because she lost. And that hurts. And she can't think anything other than Joe Biden had screwed up the country.
The other thing she said, and I don't pick on her, I wish, this is probably an exciting time for her. She's on a book tour and everything. But she said that she didn't have time on her side. And I actually thought she was lucky there were only 107 days, because the more and more people did see her, she had no interviews for the longest time. And then she did an interview that was pretty bad. I think it was with CNN. I think it was with Dana Bash. And then she did the one on The View that we just saw. The more we began to see her, the more time she had was actually, I thought, to her disadvantage, because in the beginning, she had the balloon. She had a spectacular Democratic convention. It was quite exciting and exhilarating. But the more she got out there, that's where the problem arose.
So usually you need more time so that you can raise the money. But Kamala Harris did something we still don't talk about. She, I believe, illegally used all that Biden money that he had raised that she did not raise. Let's be clear. and she was able to transfer that into her account. And then all the big guys, a lot of them came forward and wrote her massive checks, and she was very well funded. So I agree with you, Greta. Time, usually need the time to raise the funds. She got all the funds she needed. She didn't have a funding problem. She didn't have a timing problem. She was just selling bad goods. The policies that were regurgitated from Joe Biden had already been rejected by the American people. And her personality, I know it sounds mean, but her personality wasn't winsome enough to overcome it.
I think the smarter thing, I think she'd be smart to run for governor of California. I think she'd get elected and get back up on the horse that way politically.
Well, Richard Nixon decided to run for governor of California. He lost, and he still got back up on the horse and became the president. I don't think we should write her off, but I think this book really annoyed Democrats. I've talked to several friends today, and they're scratching their head. You know, why did she treat people so rudely, and why did she show clear, I think, bigotry towards Pete Buttigieg, which ruins her brand as this woke, darling?
Matt Schlapp, always nice to see you. The book's an interesting, I actually like to listen to it because she narrates it herself, and would she feel like she's telling you it herself. Matt Schlapp, thank you.
Thanks, Greta.
Coming up, the Democratic Senator, Majority Leader, Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer cannot control that when the record continues. Days after President Trump met with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the UK now says it will break with the United States and recognize a Palestinian state. Israel says this will just reward Hamas. Earlier, I spoke with Pennsylvania Democrat Senator John Fetterman. Senator, nice to see you again, sir.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be back.
Senator, this is one of these interviews which I have a sneaking suspicion you and I agree on right from the get-go. I know what I think, but let me ask you, what do you think about the fact that UK and some other countries are going to recognize Palestinian state?
Well, of course, I strongly disagree with that. But even more than that, I just can't understand why they would do that. You have human beings, what Hamas have kept them, virtually 2 years underground, tortured, starved, and being forced to dig their own graves. And yes, I see the video, the kinds of the spectacles of now when they release them, and they would march out, coffins too of children that they beat to death. I mean, these are key allies like the UK, and what's the message to Hamas? Now, if Hamas responds and they cheer that, like what's wrong with you if your decisions now Hamas is cheering? Why can't you just reevaluate? Like maybe we're on the wrong side here.
Well, it seems to me that they could have waited if they think this is a solution, not while people are being held, to give a win to Hamas, because to me it seems there's no incentive if they think that the world is more and more and more turning in their favor and against Israel. There's just no motive for the Hamas to release those that are being held.
I agree, and more than what it does for Hamas is that it gives them like a narrative. Now they can claim, well, this is all of the destruction in Gaza and what they've been through and what those terrible things that we did on 10/7. It's now we can all celebrate because now we've become, our own state as regard to that thing. And that's one of the reasons why and I fully support why Netanyahu, they can't ever hand that to them. I support what they continue to do because I don't understand why the world and these countries now are looking to recognize Palestine, saying, why aren't they demanding before we do anything to, release all those hostages? And now just what happens in a war, one side surrenders and they all work together and now, they have a new path. That's what's happened all across our history. And now here whether it's a reward, but it also creates a narrative. And I even hear what Hamas is saying, now, like, this is why this is part of the sacrifice. And now it's all made it all worth okay.
Well, you've got the UK, you've got Portugal, France, Canada, Australia. They're recognizing a Palestinian state, and of course you have the United States, which is not. But they all those nations recognize Hamas as terrorists. And I just can't forget, who does the UK in particular think is going to lead the Palestinian state? It can't be President Mahmoud Abbas. He's 89 years old. He's the Palestinian Authority leader. So have they even thought forward who is going to lead this mythical nation that doesn't exist, that they are now rewarding the terrorists?
Well, I mean, absolutely. It's a failed nation, not even a failed nation. It's clearly it's failed, and there is no real leadership except for Hamas. And it's clear Hamas refuses to change their views. I mean, their stated objective is to destroy Israel and run all of the Jews into the sea, from the river to the sea. Of course, that's their entire slogan. And now who's going to be left? Well, that's why it's entirely appropriate to force Hamas into submission. And now, of course, the Palestinians suffer for that. Now, people blame Israel for that suffering. I fully blame Hamas and, of course, Iran and the proxies that they've created and have done these terrible things. And that's why, our key allies, what kind of values do your nation live by? And now you are absolutely going to recognize a state under these kinds of circumstances and how it came about. I mean, can you imagine if Macron, if Hamas tortured and murdered 1,200 French citizens and are keeping French citizens underground for 2 years? How much enthusiasm in France there'd be now to, hey, let's recognize their new nation as a response to that thing. And it's astonishing. Why is not Israel allowed to just win a war? And why are they fully responsible for feeding everybody for all these things? The responsible lies with Hamas. And now the Palestinian people have to decide, hey, we have to find a new path forward. You can't have a government that's committed to destroying and in perpetual war with Israel.
I think some people, and right now I'm focusing my attention on the UK, where I was just last week covering the president's trip, is I think they may have forgotten who started this war. That would be Hamas. And I think that they've forgotten that the war could have ended on October 8th or October 9th, or even now, if Hamas stands by, if Hamas stands down. And they did the most horrific things in the world to the ones they slaughtered and the ones they tortured. I mean, looking at the 47-minute tape that I did, I think it was about 47, watching people get beheaded by Hamas, that is so, it's just, I can't think, what do you think? Why would UK do this? Our good friends in particular, why would the UK do this now?
Well, I can't speak to why exactly what their motivation is, but in our nation right now, there's people that are willing to pander to the other kinds of extreme things now and identify all of these things. Now, for me, it's absolutely unacceptable to recognize Palestine. We're coming up on a 2-year anniversary. Why aren't all of these nations in the region, all the Arab nations, say, Hamas, you have to surrender. You have to send those people back home. And now, we are not going to allow you do these kinds of chaos and the lack of stability in our region. And now it's so simple. It's so simple solution. Hamas, send these people home, disarm. And now you can actually begin a conversation to rebuild Gaza. And if the Palestinian people all can agree that, okay, we can have a 2-state solution, and now we're going to recognize Israel, and now we are not going to be, the organizing principle is that we have to destroy Israel and eliminate every last Jew in the region.
Well, you know what? I spoke to, interviewed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I've interviewed him a couple times, but most recently, he said this to me. It was right after Israel went in and did some strikes in Qatar and was roundly condemned for going into another nation and doing that. And what he said to me that made me stop and think was this, is that when the United States went into Pakistan, another nation, and got Osama bin Laden, we all cheered because we wanted Osama bin Laden, a terrorist, dead. But when Israel does it, is that they were condemned.
Yeah. Well, again, I actually agreed with. I mean, Hamas, those leadership are accountable wherever they are, and that's one of the reasons why I salute Israel. You know, they take out all their enemies wherever they are. Hezbollah, you know, the nuclear scientist in Iran. I actually fully supported the administration's strike against the Iranian nuclear facilities as well too. And even in Iran, they eliminated a member of Hamas leadership, and they blew up, you know, where he is staying at. You know, wherever they are, Israel never forgives and forgets, and I absolutely support those things. Our nation would have never, ever, ever tolerated if Canada was launching thousands of rockets, you know, into our nation and killing our citizens. Now, why should we force Israel to say that that's okay? You got to deal with those things. You know, I fully support the things Israel has done: destroyed, pulverized Hamas, absolutely neutralized Hezbollah, absolutely struck back and demonstrated that Iran really doesn't have the kinds of capabilities, and they forced them into a ceasefire. And now here we are in the end game now, and they are isolating Hamas now in Gaza City. And now all of it could have ended, as you pointed out, October 7th. And here we are coming up on the 2nd anniversary. That's the one core truth that so many people forget. This could have ended, of course, if they never had done that in 10/7. But now they refuse to do that. And Israel is forced to bring this to this end game where we're at right now.
You know, there's so many issues, you know, whether it's domestic or foreign, that, you know, there are gray areas with me. I think, well, it could be this, it could be that or something. But this is the one area, and the reason why I wanted to talk to you, because it is so, you know, this is so plain to me. And maybe it's because I've been there and I've seen the atrocity. I don't know. But why do you think it is? Even, you know, colleagues in the Senate on both sides of the aisle, some of them, why don't they see it like you do?
And again, I can't speak for anyone else of what they. I hope they don't judge our views either, but I won't judge theirs. But I think it should be mandatory. Everybody has to watch that video, and they actually recorded these things. I mean, first of all, whoever does that, who wakes up in the morning, you know, like, yes, I know I'm going to murder and rape and torture and set families on fire. Now we're going to film it too. And I've also heard those calls they intercepted. And they're calling up their parents and screaming and celebrating it like, oh, I killed 8 Jews, but with my own hands and those things. You know, like you have to burn that off the face of the earth. I mean, like you can't negotiate with that. You can't, you know, it's like that's I absolutely support those kinds of things. And now all the misery and destruction in Gaza, yeah, I'm not going to blame Israel for that. I'm going to blame Hamas. I'm going to blame Iran for what they've done that. So with all of my colleagues, that's what I'm saying. You know, if you are going to use your bandwidth, you know, you should use it to go entirely and focus that on Iran, Russia, and obviously Hamas directly. But for me, I'm never going to blame Israel and sanction Israel or now withhold any of their weapons. I saw that it's announced that the Trump administration is going to have $6 billion in new arms sales. I absolutely support that as well too. That's why, I mean, perhaps I've isolated myself, certainly with Israel in my own party, but that's the right side of history, and I refuse to pander or pretend that, you know, you can equivocate. You can't equivocate this right now. I mean, as a Democrat, these are the kinds of values that we live in. That's our values. Why would you stand with the kinds of some of these nations and places like in Gaza? They don't have those same kinds of freedoms and those kinds of values. But where it does, that's actually Israel. That's with Israel, and that's why I stand with Israel.
There's one last question, is that you talked about that tape, and I mean, it's horrifying. You see it once, you never forget it. But I've always sort of thought of Hamas as young men, predominantly, or older men. I've always thought it was about men. But on that on that audio tape and the videotape, the 47 minutes, there's one instance, I think you made reference to, where they're calling home. I remember calling home to his mother and talking about how great it was that he killed Israelis himself. I thought, okay, well, this expands it to mom. You know, as well. This is not just, male terrorists. Mom's in on it, too.
No, I mean, and I also love it They eliminated that dirtbag. They actually, who knew that guy that made that call? They eliminated him for that. That's part of holding all of those people accountable. And whether they're in Qatar or whether they're in Gaza City or wherever they are. And now, like, his mother was praise God or whatever. I mean, it's like he was calling her up saying, I just had 2 touchdowns or something. Literally was, you know, I'm so proud of you, son, for massacring, you know, innocent, civilians. You know, like what kinds of people do those kind of things and celebrates those kinds of a thing. And that's, I think, you know, there's some complicity in all of this as well too.
Senator, thank you very much. It'll be interesting to see what the Prime Minister says before the UN later this week. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Coming up, it is by the books when it comes to the NYPD, and one world leader found out the hard way. That when the record continues. No one is safe from President Trump's motorcade, not even the president of France. Last night, French President Emmanuel Macron was stopped by the NYPD from crossing the street in an attempt to get past security. Macron called Trump for help.
How are you? Guess what? I'm waiting the street because everything is frozen for you. I would love this weekend. Yeah, I know. I would follow.
Despite the call, Macron, good sport, still had to walk through the streets of Manhattan for about 30 minutes to get to the French embassy. But as I said, he seemed to be a good sport about it. He even stopped to take pictures with people. The Chris Salcedo Show is up next. People think news just happens. It doesn't. It happens because there's someone there to capture the moment, to explain it and share it. That's my job. I go where news breaks and give you the facts. Join me for The Record on Newsmax.